Hi, it's Sunday, May 17th. You're about to watch my interview with Professor Mohammad Marandi, who was in Tehran. But before you do, please take a second to hit like, follow, share down below, and consider subscribing to the Trends Journal. Our next issue is out on Tuesday, and it's the world's top trend forecasts, 100% independent. We rely on nobody other than our subscribers, and we deliver every week trend forecasts that you simply won't get anywhere else. So please consider a subscription. That's trendsjournal.com. Thank you. Hi, I'm with Professor Mohammad Marandi, and the clock is ticking. That's according to President Donald Trump's most recent post on Truth Social. He says if Iran does not come to the table, agree to the U.S. demands to end the war, it will see a destruction that it has not ever seen in its existence. Professor Marandi, how do you read that most recent post by President Trump?
I think, like other Iranians, we're just going to ignore it and wait to see what happens. If the Trump regime, the Netanyahu regime, and their regional proxies initiate another round of aggression, I think it's very clear that the Iranian response this time round will be even more decisive than during the 39-day military aggression against the country.
What do you make of all these threats, Professor? Why do you think Trump keeps talking about annihilating Iran, come to the table or else? Is it starting to ring hollow in Iran? What do Iranians make of the constant threats? I woke up today and I saw his post and I was like, are we living in the movie Groundhog Day where he repeats the same thing over and over? To what end?
Well, Iranians see him as a psychopath, but they also see the regime, the U.S. regime, as a regime of psychopaths. And the fact that major journalists, major media outlets do not express any outrage, it exposes them as psychopaths too. So it is a regime and a political order that is full of psychopaths. We have never heard before any leader of any government anywhere in the world constantly saying that they will carry out the greatest Holocaust in human history, and the elites of that society act as if that's normal. Of course, I think over the past 2.5 years, the extermination of the Palestinian people and the extermination of many Lebanese in southern Lebanon by the Western-backed Zionist regime has made the West indifferent, more indifferent than ever before towards human life. The fact that we've been watching it online for 2.5 years, this ongoing genocide in Gaza, I think has made these people more openly indifferent. Journalists, reporters in Beirut, Western journalists and reporters don't seem to care at all about the fact that the Israeli regime is targeting medics, hunting them down across the country and wiping them out. They're indifferent to that. That's why you don't see anything in Western media outlets. You don't see these journalists using their social media platforms to expose what's going on in Lebanon. We didn't see them do it in Gaza. So the indifference towards the threats to carry out a Holocaust in Iran are somewhat, we should have expected that.
The bottom line is the U.S. has its demands. Iran has its demands. It looks like neither country gave an inch, despite the ceasefire being in place, despite the blockade on top of the blockade. It seems like neither country seems willing to even give an inch. The U.S. said today that it won't be reimbursing Iran for the damage caused by the war. It demands that Iran stops its nuclear program. Of course, Iran says we're not going to even negotiate the nuclear program until this war is stopped and the blockade's removed and everything and the sanctions are lifted and it's reimbursed for the war. Professor, it just seems like there's no diplomatic off-ramp because both countries have not given an inch. Would you say that that's a fair assessment to where we are right now?
Well, there is a couple of points that should be mentioned. One is that the United States launched this, and the Israeli regime launched an unprovoked assault, like the Nazis at the beginning of the Second World War. And thus, because it's aggression, they do have to pay compensation. And Iran is not going to uh, relinquish that demand. In addition to that, the U.S. demands are violations of Iranian sovereignty, and Iranian demands are that Iran's sovereignty be respected. So there's a fundamental difference between the nature of what the regime in Washington is demanding and what the Iranian people are demanding. And Iran is not going to be intimidated. I think that by now, the United States should have learned this. Regime should recall that at the beginning of the 12-day war, Trump demanded unconditional surrender, and by the end, it was Netanyahu who was begging for a ceasefire. At the beginning of this war, Trump was again demanding unconditional surrender, and by day 39 of the fighting, it was the United States, Trump himself, who accepted the Iranian 10-point plan as a framework for negotiations because he lost the war. And of course, there is not a double siege. This is something that is basically a myth repeated in the West. Iran has never shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Those countries that did not attack Iran, their ships passed through. The Chinese, the Russians, the Iraqis, Oman, and its ships are allowed through. And we've seen ships that go to India and Pakistan, among other countries, pass through the Strait of Hormuz. But the five regimes, the Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Kuwait, that facilitated the assault on the Iranian people, that helped murder 168 little girls at school, their ships will not be allowed to leave the Strait of Hormuz without an agreement that's acceptable to Iran. So the U.S. siege is illegal. It is an attempt to starve the Iranian people, and it follows an unprovoked act of war against the country. This is another act of war. But in the case of Iran, the attitude that Iran has towards these five regimes is one of a victim that is punishing aggressors.
When we talk about what's going on in Iran, it's hard not to consider what's going on across the entire Gulf and Middle East. We had the top diplomat from Iran at a BRICS conference last week, and he was talking about the illegal war of aggression waged by the US, and the UAE diplomat who was there essentially blamed Iran for the war, and Iraqi, I'm mispronouncing his name. He came out and he criticized the UAE for not saying anything about the US aggression. When you look on the war right now, what country do you think upsets Iran the most? Would you say it's the UAE or Saudi Arabia? What country does Iran look at differently more than any other in the region?
All of them are child killers. All of them have helped murder thousands of Iranians. All of them have helped destroy the lives of tens of thousands of Iranians. But the UAE is a particularly despicable regime, and it's walking on very thin ice. Its allegiance to Netanyahu and the Israeli regime is open for all to see. It has gone much further than the others. And Netanyahu's trip to the UAE during the war makes the UAE his frontline battlefield. And the fact that the head of Mossad and Israeli military also went there shows that the Mohammed bin Zayed regime, the Abu Dhabi Emirate, is an enemy of the Iranian people. And therefore, if the United States carries out its threat to assault the Iranian people again, I think there will be special focus on the UAE regime.
I mentioned earlier in our conversation that Trump has threatened before. In your view, do you feel like a new military round, a new strike will occur? Are we closer to that point than what we have been in our previous conversations? Or do you think this is more just rhetoric from Trump, who's desperate and trying to scare Iran into submission. What's your feeling? Do you think you're more at risk for a new round?
The working assumption here is that there will be an assault, and a major assault, and that it could include land troops, and it also can include terrorists, Wahhabi and Salafi terrorists, ISIS-like terrorists from alongside the Pakistani border, terrorists from northern Iraq and the Kurdish areas, and the remnants of those who carried out armed insurrection on January the 8th and 9th, alongside perhaps a ground assault by the United States that will also be accompanied by an assault deep inside the country, like the one near Isfahan, which failed during the 39 days of fighting. The Iranians are working on that assumption, that all of these can happen simultaneously. Of course, that doesn't mean that they will all actually happen simultaneously, but that is what Iran is planning for.
My last question, Professor. I know it's very early in the morning out there on Monday in Tehran. I thank you for joining the Trends Journal as always. I know you don't really have a high admiration for Jake Sullivan, the former national security advisor for President Biden, but he came out during an interview, I don't know if you saw it, where he expressed regret for the approach that the Biden administration took towards what happened in Gaza. I don't know if he went to the full length and called it a genocide. I think he came up short from calling it a genocide, but he said far too many people were killed. And it was taken by a lot on social media as an admission of somewhat guilt or trying to save face for his future in politics. Jake Sullivan was once a golden boy. He's a Hillary Clinton apostle. When you hear a person like Jake Sullivan come out and express remorse about his role in what happened in Gaza, do you think that this is a trend that will be taking more hold in the United States, that people who worked in the government during what happened in Gaza, as they try to figure out the rest of their career, they will have to be held responsible and feel obligated to explain their role? What's your take on seeing something like that?
Well, these are people who are guilty of crimes against humanity. And if there were Nuremberg trials, they would be on trial for the death penalty. And he is also the person who wrote in an email on February the 12th, 2012, to Hillary Clinton that in Syria, Al-Qaeda is on our side. So obviously there's no remorse. There's no real remorse. These people are utterly sinister and evil. However, it does show how the United States is changing and how public opinion among the youth, among Jews, Muslims, Christians, and others, Hindus, is changing and turning against or waking up and realizing what is happening and turning against Zionism and ethno-supremacism. And people like him recognize that. It's not as if he's seen the light. It's that he's seeing the world changing before his eyes. But I have no respect for someone like him. Perhaps hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been slaughtered. And if that's the case, then hundreds of thousands of children have been slaughtered. Some estimates go up to go in the hundreds of thousands, directly and indirectly killed in Gaza. But people across the world are waking up. And people across the world today are also waking up to the fact that it is Trump, Netanyahu, and Zionism that are dragging down the world economy, all for the sake of strengthening ethno-supremacism.
On that note, Professor Mohammad Marandi, University of Tehran, thank you for joining the Trends Journal as always, and please stay safe out there.
Thank you for having me.